of band is this?
Everybody poops sometimes.
Give us this.
Wake up, sweetness.
Your first time should be more than special.
I'm in, Savannah said. Good Lord, Gemma.
When a man and a woman, in this case, really love each other, what happens is they fuck.
Ooh, hello?
Oh, dang it, I lost my fish. This next word almost sounds like Quidditch. Quidditch milade Diana Agosiagath an Fiedian. As much as I love fucking you, sweetness, we stared into each other's eyes whilst I moaned in ecstasy. Having consumed half of the bourbon, I keep saying bourbon. You know, every time I mess up on a word, Stunt Mama just shows up.
She had her seductive smile on her lips.
I said we couldn't have sex. I didn't say anything about everything else. Ew. Happy to help. Biatch. You are the spark of light and the vastness of my night. His note, like a finality to a beautiful, breathtaking song. Ho ho ho. I can't keep a straight face. Good evening. Happy Sunday. It is. Yes, it is Sunday. Hope you're doing well. I've been naughty and I regret nothing. All right then. Well, that's fine. You know, I can't argue with that. And hi to you too. I can't argue if you've been naughty. You do you. Oh boy. This weekend was a bit weird, to be honest. A bit strange. We got hit with freezing temps and then rain on top of that. So we just, like, a whole bunch of stuff on Saturday got canceled within the city because you couldn't get anywhere. Stop mama's mama. Not as naughty as I'd like, but you know, life be lifin'. Life is lifin'. But yeah, a lot of stuff was shut down on Saturday and a little bit today just because of the road conditions and the temperatures and the ice everywhere. So we didn't do a whole lot outside. We didn't do anything outside on Saturday. Gosh, excuse me. I'm so sorry. Frog in my throat. But today I went out and chipped off ice off of some of the driveway. And then I took the kiddo out. We went to the store to get a few things. And then we went to the bowling alley and did some bowling for fun. So yeah, it was nuts. I was thinking about you over the weekend when I was watching the Weather Channel. Yeah, we got hit with all that, and it wasn't great. It melted a little bit today because it was above freezing. Still is, but it's gonna take a lot of heat to get rid of it all. You know, definitively. But it's fine. It's fine. Welcome to winter. Ooh, hot tea coming in. So sick of the cold already. I can't wait to move. I don't remember if you told me where. Yeah, no worries, Stop Mama's Mama. Did you tell me where you're gonna move? Oh, that's good tea. That is really good tea. That's some good stuff. Hits the spot. All right, I'm looking forward to getting back into our story this evening. Yes, indeed. I can't believe we're on chapter 14 already. Like, when did that happen? That's not fair. KD, good evening. How are you? No, I haven't told many people, but due to things, I no longer feel safe here, so we're moving to California as soon as we can get the money together and our affairs in order. California? Wow. I mean, that's a move. That's a stretch. My fingers are crossed. Absolutely. I hope that works out. Seriously. All right. Well. He was born in San Bernardino. Okay. So I'm assuming gonna go back to that area. Jingle, jingle. Let's switch over. Oh, and also there's a puzzle. Look at that beautiful Christmas. Well, I guess it's kind of small. You might have to pinch and zoom a little, but it just looks so cozy. Unless you have to go outside or get an Amazon package delivered. But otherwise, it looks great. Possibly, we haven't decided. Okay. Excuse me. I'm wearing pants, and I really wish I hadn't. I'm just going to throw that out there. Just being brutally honest with you. I'm extremely tempted to take them off. No comment. Take them off to music. I don't know if we have the right kind of music for that. It's not really the kind of, I mean, I could make it work, but I don't think anyone's going to get riled up about it. You know what I mean? I need to check out Street. Oh, you mean Stream Elements? Is that what you mean? Street Elements? Or did you mean like Not for Vanity or Indies United? Oh, wrong glasses. That's okay. Yeah, well, I'll start reading. We'll see how it goes, but it's very possible that I'm going to be taking some pants off. I'm just telling you right now. It might happen. But anyway, that being said, welcome to Sunday evening. This is your chance to sit back, relax, and just be. Enjoy the peace, enjoy the calm, enjoy a story. I'll read a story to you. Because that's what we do here. We read books. So, with that being said, sit back, relax, and with this ball in my face, I will read you a story. Chapter 14. Holmes was true to his word and was always the first one stirring in the mornings. I would sometimes observe him from my bedroom window, sitting on the porch at dawn with a cup of fresh coffee and a cigarette. Then Holmes would drain his coffee cup, carefully stubbing out his cigarette before setting out on his journey to the village. Holmes returned each day before luncheon, giving him ample time to relax in the drawing room with his pipe rack and his slipper of tobacco as he studied the morning papers. First the Corriere della Sera, and then the Il Sole 24 Ore. Each publication sorely tested his command of the Italian language. Hence the floor around his chair would be randomly littered with cigarette ends, tobacco, and discarded newspaper cuttings. Holmes's eccentric conduct had unfortunately caught the attention of Gabriella. She shot him a look of disdain each time he returned from his morning excursions. Holmes's steely gray eyes would glance to where Gabriella had tidied up after him, complaining that the room was ridiculously tidy. Then Holmes resumed where he had left off first, knocking the ashes out of his after-breakfast pipe onto the wooden floor, then slowly refilling it, much to Gabriella's horror. Finally, she would lament to anyone who would listen that she was constantly removing tobacco from ridiculous places. That's a great way to be a house guest. Make it look like you own the place and you don't care what happened to it. One morning, Gabriella entered the barn with a basket of clean laundry and was shocked to discover the room where Holmes had sat once more in a state of wild disarray. Then, after an episode involving a particularly energetic emptying of ashtrays and slippers, things came to a head. Gabriella rushed into the drawing room, her pince-nez pushed up onto her forehead and her cap strings flying around her chin. She complained to me, gesturing to the overflowing ashtray on the occasional table. "God in heaven!" cried Gabriella. "Look at the state of this room. Your husband even keeps tobacco in his slipper? Why? It's enough to drive any woman out of her wits." I patted Gabriella's arm reassuringly. "My dear Gabriella, in the eyes of my husband, organization is in the mind, not just the environment. Mr. Holmes may be messy and untidy at times, but he is never disorganized. There is most certainly a method to his madness." Some might say there is madness in this method." Gabriella sniffed before dashing off to fetch the dustpan and brush. She swept up the tobacco remnants and cleaned the room before returning to her cottage, a look of the utmost perplexity upon her face. I awoke each morning to the sound of the swifts singing outside my bedroom window, the sun streaming through the blinds, and the aromatic aroma of café noir. Gabriella arrived every morning with a breakfast of toast, butter, cantucci, honey, and fresh fruit. I took only coffee noir and dry toast, having little appetite in the morning. After breakfast, I sliced up the leftover bread before walking into the garden, calling out to the swifts. Tossing the bread onto the lawn, I laughed as I felt the winged feathers of Mama House Gaming. Just kidding. Mama. You didn't have to come and raid me, silly. You didn't even have to end your stream. You were having such a good time playing Fortnite. Thank you. Thank you for coming. Pure Geek, good to see you. Shelby is ready? Okay, all right, well. How are you? I'm good. I'm good. We're gonna have a nice, calm, relaxing reading stream this evening. I was just complaining that I may need to take off my pants because I should have just worn shorts. Hi, Kiri. Thank you for the follow. Welcome. And Pure, thank you for the follow as well. I appreciate it. And Geek, my goodness, all the follows. Is it because I said I might have to take my pants off? Might have to say that more often. Look, I'm warm and they're constricting in all the annoying places. That's all I'm saying. All right. Look, calm down. Thank you for rating me greatest mod ever, Mama House Gaming. Can you give yourself a shout out, please? I'm currently keeping my thumb on the page so I do not lose my spot, which I do all the time. Am I God mode in this channel? Pretty much. I bow to you. All right. Thank you for the raid. You're adorable. I'm going to keep reading. Oh.
Don't worry about it. I'm coming back.
For 3. Tossing the bread onto the lawn, I laughed as I felt the winged feathers of the male birds brushing against my legs until every crumb was gone. Wait, that's not...
I don't know where...
That's not Faz, is it? Was that Faz? It looked a little different. Either way. Sorry, 1 second. You didn't see? That's okay. It was one of those ghost hunting style games. It might have been Faz, but it looks a little bit different. Anywho, I laughed as I felt the winged feathers of the male birds brushing against my legs until every crumb was gone. Then the swifts flew back into the eaves of the barn, rejoining the females. Gabriella returned after breakfast as part of her daily routine to collect the towels, sheets, and other laundry. To help pass the time, I would often engage in a little small talk with her. For example, I noticed the housekeeper raised an eyebrow at being expected to change 2 separate beds. Although it was customary for married couples to sleep in separate bedrooms during this period, it was inappropriate to do so during the honeymoon period. Regarded by many as the most beautiful time in a couple's marriage. I sensed that Gabriella was suspicious. Nevertheless, I treated the housekeeper kindly, poured her a cup of tea from the pot, and pushed a plate of Cantucci toward her. He would sit at the kitchen table, chatting until eventually Gabriella returned to her duties. On the first morning, I gestured towards the second bedroom and shrugged. Gabriella, my husband. He is quite the snorer, and the girl needs her sleep. And that is the end of chapter 14. Ah, yes, the puzzle. It's a very picturesque Christmas, not even technically Christmas, really. It's just more of a winter landscape. But it just has that Christmas vibe to it. I'm curling up in my recliner, so if I don't respond to anything, I fell asleep. That's perfect. Okay. Chapter 15 starts on page 113, exclamation point someone, if you want to see the link to our author. And not only this book, but other books. It's pretty awesome. I routinely drove down to the village each morning, considering it only proper to give Irene Adler as much privacy as possible. Oh, by the way, this is Sherlock Holmes chapter. Lost my place. Quite fantastic. I posted the letters, checking in with the telegraph office, before making an extensive tour of the neighborhood I was so familiar with, taking in every detail, looking out for anything suspicious. On the first morning, I stopped off on my way back from the village to visit Giovanni Anca at the apiary. At the apiary? At the apiary. Apiary. I think it's apiary. Anyway. The sight of Giovanni's face struck a chord with me. His deep-set brown eyes hidden behind round spectacles, the familiarity of grizzled beard and his deeply lined features, the locks of grey hair curling from under his tattered straw hat. He was as I remembered, although his shoulders were more bowed, and he looked a little older. He had at once recognized me as we shook hands. "How are you and Anka? Still tending to your bees, I see." "It's good to see you again, Mr. Holmes," said Anka. "As you can see, I'm still here, not getting any younger." I'm beyond autumn, as my wife keeps reminding me. On a warm spring day, there are few places on earth I'd rather be than right here, tending to my bees. We stood in silence for a moment as we listened in awe to the hum and murmur of the worker bees inside the hives, which, mixed with the constant buzz of activity in the wildflower meadow close by, was an exhilarating experience. But then our eyes diverted to an apple tree, engulfed by the whirring hum of 1,000 tiny wings. A connection with nature that's a balm for the soul. I shook my head. You must have spent many happy hours with these magnificent creatures. I have indeed, Mr. Holmes. You know, this has always been my favorite time of year. The bees perform a little waggle dance to signal where the best flowers are in the meadow. They love the clover and the apple and pear trees. I've always been fascinated by bees, ever since I was a young boy. Tell me, before you open a hive, do you still blow a little smoke into it? Oh, yes, Mr. Holmes. It calms the swarm. But, like people, some colonies are more aggressive than others. We have to watch out for wasps and hornets, or they will destroy the hives. Tending the bees has become an almost religious experience. There is something rather spiritual about bees. I truly believe they have souls. They are the saviors of humanity. Anka lit a sprig of rosemary, wafting it gently over the comb. I smiled at Anka. Half closing my eyes, I recited a poem from The Tempest. Where the bee sucks, there suck I. In a cow's slip bell I lie. There I crouch when owls do cry. On the bat's back I do fly. After summer, merrily, merrily, merrily shall I live now, under the bosom that hangs on the bough. Well, thank you for your time, Anka. I extended my hand. I had best be on my way. It has been a pleasure to see you again, and these magnificent creatures, of course. I understand that congratulations are in order. Anka stared at me curiously. They told me you had recently married. Les Sols is rather an odd place to celebrate your nuptials. It wouldn't be my first choice. He chuckled. Yes, indeed, I replied. Going to do some things and I'll be back in a bit? Yeah, no worries. No worries. Go do your thing. As my wife and I recently married in Italy, it would have been churlish of me not to take the opportunity to call and pay my respects to the people who were instrumental in helping me when I was last here 4 years ago. I shall never forget the kindness bestowed upon me. We are all pleased to see you again, Mr. Holmes. You are a sight for sore eyes, and that's a fact. I take it you are having a rest from all of the sleuthing while you are here on your honeymoon? I always keep my wits about me, Anka. I'm no stranger to the unexpected. Evil is all around us, my friend. It can manifest itself as quickly as these magnificent creatures produce honey. Please feel free to visit the apiary any time, Mr. Holmes. There will always be a warm welcome for you here. I shook hands with Giovanni before returning to the brougham and making my way back to the barn. And that was chapter 15. Chapter 14 and 15 are interesting little chapters. It's not really so much about the story in of itself. I think, and this is just my interpretation, Katie, you are absolutely welcome to tell me, no, you're wrong. But I remember Holmes saying that this could take some time. And I feel like chapter 14 and 15 are simple but really well thought out ways to help show that neither Irene or Sherlock are in any kind of rush with where they are. There's no pent-up anxiousness. They're not, jittery or trying to figure out what's next. It's just a really nice, simple way of showing that they're more relaxed in their new environment, and therefore time has gone by. At least that's the way I see it. And if that's the case, I think it's very clever. On that note, we move on to chapter 16. From Irene Adler's perspective. Later that evening, as Holmes and I prepared for dinner, I was distraught to discover I had mislaid my favorite ebony hair clip, a gift from Estelle. I think it also humanizes the great detective a little more. That's true. I picked up on that, but only subconsciously. Yeah. Kind of gives him a more normal person vibe. Because usually he's anything but. Night Marcher, how you doing, sir? How are you?
Hey, hey, Chrissy. Hi.
Night Marcher, once Delta Force opens up the Black Hawk campaign, I'm definitely going to be playing that. Because I have it installed, I'm just waiting for the campaign to release. Hope you're doing well, dude. I'm over here leveling another tune because I keep dying on hardcore. Well, I mean, that's why it's called hardcore. You're gonna die. It's a thing. Anyway, good to see you. Enjoy a story while you level up. I knew I had packed it, as I remembered seeing it in my case in Milan. I decided to search for it later, otherwise I would be late for dinner and had no wish to keep the celebrated detective waiting. Perish the thought. Attired in a white gown with crochet lace bodice, my hair hung in rag curls, I entered the drawing room. Holmes acknowledged my presence with a curt nod. Good evening, Miss Adler. I hope you're feeling up to the interrogation you are most likely to receive from Violetta and Ava Esperoto. I fancy the ladies will be far more interested in your narrative than mine. Ah, yes, especially Ava, I said. That young lady has such an inquiring mind. I will be fine, Mr. Holmes. It is yet another opportunity to hone my acting skills. Although from what I can remember, you are hardly devoid of talent in that department yourself. Holmes flashed me a tight-lipped smile. Although his mood appeared to have changed again, I could feel the tension in the room. In truth, Holmes's mood had not improved since we arrived in Fiesole. He was no doubt pining for the hustle and bustle of London, the mess, the noise, and his bohemian lifestyle. Living in semi-isolation under the same roof as a woman, Holmes was clearly not a happy man. The thought that he was to be the subject of close personal scrutiny obviously did not bode well with him. Holmes shrugged in an ungracious manner whenever I attempted to broach the subject. Little by little, I was discovering the uncertainty of his mood changes. Finally deciding to act, I gazed up at him with a smile. Mr. Holmes, do you not think we should devise a plan, some kind of strategy before we go to dinner? Our narrative surely ought to be believable. I held out my notebook. I made a few notes this morning, which I have been memorizing. I'm more than happy to relay them to you. Do you have anything you would like to add? I waited, expectantly. He bowed to me coldly, avoiding my eyes. Oh, I think it would be best to leave the salacious details of our married life in your more capable hands, Miss Adler, he snorted. Hopefully, it should not prove too trying. My ideas would not look out of place on the back of a Vestas matchbox. I stared at him in disbelief as, for the first time, I began to doubt my protector. The response from Holmes was indifference. He sighed deeply, staring at me coldly. I hope you're not going to cry, Miss Adler. No, I'm not going to cry, I said. First, I would not give you the satisfaction, and quite frankly, I find your disrespectful tone and lack of empathy completely underwhelming. I appreciate that this isn't easy for either of us, but even so, that doesn't give you poetic license to treat me as such, leaving everything up to me just because you feel unhappy. I forced a smile and bit my quivering lip, then nodded. If that's what you want, then so be it. I was seething inside, and not at all happy with his insinuations that I was promiscuous. Still, I would set that aside for another time, a time when he was in a more pleasant mood. God knew when that would be. The elaborate deception was, after all, his idea. Even so, I was beginning to have grave reservations about the dinner. He is going to hate this. Living under the same roof with an egomaniac whose moods appeared to change more often than the weather was hardly my idea of fun. But if he was leaving the details of our marriage in my more than capable hands, then I must be sure not to disappoint him. Yes, Mr. Holmes, you are right, of course. It is indeed fortuitous that we have my invaluable experience to draw upon. In the meantime, you could attempt to smile a little more, for appearance sake, of course. Holmes bowed with cold self-possession. We walked over to the farmhouse together. I noticed Ava peering out of the drawing-room window, her face pressed against the window pane. I casually touched Holmes's sleeve, linking my arm into his. Holmes recoiled at my touch. He looked at me in the startled fashion of a young stag facing the barrel of a gun, fixing me with an intense, piercing stare. "We are under scrutiny," I said. A wiry smile crossed my lips as Holmes returned a silent nod, retaining his pensive mood. Finally, we arrived at the farmhouse and were greeted at the front door by Antonia. She escorted us into the drawing room. The Espirito family were all in attendance, anxiously waiting to greet their guests. "You are both very welcome," Ludo beamed. "Do come and join us in the drawing room. We have been looking forward to seeing you." We were seated together on a hard-backed couch. Ludo poured Holmes a whiskey and soda. I accepted a small glass of dry sherry, aware that I needed to keep my wits about me for now. Violetta smiled at us warmly. "I trust you both slept well?" "Yes, we did, thank you," I said. "We were both exhausted after our long journey. However, I would like to take this opportunity to thank you all, on behalf of myself and my husband, for accommodating us at such short notice." "It is not a problem," said Violetta. "You will both always be welcome in our home at any time." I took a sip from my glass, meeting Violetta's gaze. "You know, Sherlock insisted on bringing me here to show me where he stayed in Fiesole, and to introduce me to his friends. But I must say the farm is so beautiful and tranquil. It's just what we needed after our hectic schedules." Ava was staring at me, her face flushed. She was almost delirious with excitement. "What part of America are you from, Mr. Holmes? Mrs. Holmes?" "Oh, please, I must insist that you call me Neen. Mrs. Holmes is far too formal. We all are friends here, are we not?" "I'm from Trenton, New Jersey. I miss my homeland so much. The rolling hills, the verdant forests, and of course my family." "Neen, do you think you will ever return to live in America?" "I doubt it, Ava. I will, of course, return from time to time to see my family. But speaking as a performer, Americans chip away at you when you are successful, whereas in Europe they tend to put you on a pedestal. But of course, my rightful place is now in London with my beloved husband." I smiled at home, gazed at him adoringly. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. I can picture this too in my head. Like, he's got to be like, yes, quite right. "But surely you will miss performing in La Scala," said Violetta. Oh, yes, I will. I intend to return there one day, but for now, I must put my husband first. When you truly love someone, you want the best for them, even if it's not always the right thing for you. I glanced across the table to observe Holmes' arch an eyebrow. I tightly drew my lips, trying not to smile. Nin, may I ask, what's your favorite song? Asked the wide-eyed Ava. The hymn by John Newton, Amazing Grace. Why that song? Because it's so inspirational. Newton's inspiring lyrics will always retain their relevance. However, I have to say that Stephen Foster, the father of American music, was one of my most significant musical influences. Violetta glanced over at her daughter, giving her a minute shaking of her head. Ava, you are bombarding our guests with far too many questions. I laughed. It's not a problem, Violetta. Ava is naturally curious, as I was at her age, so I don't mind. Given carte blanche, Ava continued with her interrogation. Why did you decide to become an opera singer? And did you enjoy your time at La Scala? My father taught me to play the pianoforte when I was 5 years old. I remember the first time I heard him play Für Elise by Beethoven. I was completely captivated by the melody. After that, my inner diva emerged and I demanded professional lessons. So I started piano lessons with a private tutor from age 6. I took up singing lessons around the same time. The day I joined La Scala was the happiest of my life. When I became prima donna, I received letters from people suffering from many problems. They told me that my singing was like medicine to them and transported them from their unfortunate situations. That was quite a humbling experience. I've always yearned to visit La Scala, said Ava. I have never been farther than Siena. But it must be quite something to be able to get out and spread joy into the lives of other people. How does it feel being on the stage of that magnificent theater, singing in front of all those people? Special, extraordinary, standing among the greats. There is a high that is equal to nothing else. But you have to go out there and give a piece of yourself, your life, your soul. Then perhaps the Logion will accept you and give you an outstanding ovation at the end of your performance. Ava stared at me excitedly. Finally, Violetta looked over at her daughter, holding up a warning finger. Please make this your last question, young lady. I will. I promise. I'm sorry, Mama. Ava turned her attention back to me. Nin, have you ever wondered what you would have done? What career you would have chosen if you hadn't become an opera singer? Well, that's an excellent question, Ava, and an easy one for me to answer. I would have become an actress, certainly. I always enjoyed reading plays, and when I was at school, I played Ophelia in Hamlet. Since then, I've always had a penchant for the sweet swan of Avon. I traveled to New York when I was 18 and attended acting lessons on Broadway. The teachers were pretty tough. One day they ordered the students to go home and take a bath in ice-cold water to improve our mental resilience. I laughed out loud, observing Ava's shocked expression. I was fortunate to appear in 2 productions on Broadway. That was an exciting time for a young girl. My father insisted that I continue with my operatic training. I traveled to Warsaw later that year and spent the next 3 years receiving special training before taking up a position at the Warsaw Governmental Theatre. I studied and performed all principal contralto roles to craft my versatility. A few months later, I finally achieved my dream of being accepted into the chorus of La Scala. I was there for 3 years before I was offered the prima donna position at the Grand Opera House in Warsaw. In hindsight, that was the worst decision I ever made. After a disastrous love affair, I decided to try my luck and move to London. I performed in several concerts and took pupils under my tutelage, and in singing and the pianoforte. I met my first husband, Godfrey, in London. He died over 2 years ago. So when I met Sherlock at La Scala, it felt as though fate had at last dealt me a winning hand. They say the third time's the charm. Violetta looked over at me in admiration. My God, Nin, you have indeed led an adventurous life. You take my breath away. You are so confident, so polished. Ludo paused from topping up my glass and smiled at me. From what we read in Guionali, you were often under scrutiny. Did you feel that you were treated differently because you are a woman? Oh, without a shadow of doubt, Ludo. But, of course, being discriminated against in public was all part and parcel of being in the limelight. I learned to trust my instincts in a profession where women's voices are seldom heard. Our male contemporaries get away with so much more than women. There were so many articles that began with Irene Adler and so. Any relationship I entered into, no matter how innocent, would take precedence over my success. And that was the main reason Sherlock and I have kept our marriage under wraps until now. In fact, at this moment in time, only you lovely people and a few other villagers are privy to the fact we are married. I glanced across at Holmes. He stared back at me pensively. Well, said Violetta, you may have all the peace and tranquility you desire here at Les Saules, and I speak for all of us when I say that you are both welcome to stay here with us for as long as you need. Holmes turned his head and smiled at Violetta. That is most kind of you. Thank you. Violetta beamed at him, waving a languid hand dismissively. It's nothing. Our great pleasure. Ava had never taken her eyes off me. Nin, it must be wonderful to be famous. Fame is a funny business, I promptly rejoined. Fickle, too. It doesn't change who you are, it only changes people's perception of you. I would love to go to La Scala one day. Ava smiled wistfully. Well, Ava, we will have to see what we can do about that. An ecstatic gleam shone upon Ava's face. Gabriella entered the drawing room to announce dinner. She peered at Holmes over her pince-nez. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Then finally we retired to the dining room. The starter of arancini arrived. Ludo poured me a glass of Chianti, which I gratefully accepted. I sipped from my glass, badly in need of liquid refreshment after my interrogation. I drank it fast and hard, sitting back in my chair with a satisfied air as I deftly received a refill from Ludo. You're back. Welcome back. So good to see you. Holmes stared at me in disbelief, his intense gray eyes glowing like embers. Finally, the main course of Florentine steak arrived. Violetta passed me the mustard before she asked the question I had been dreading. How did you and Sherlock meet? And where did you get married? I get so resentful sometimes that I just don't have the help and have to do everything myself. Yeah, that can be a bit stressful. Even though I have someone to help me. I do a lot of it myself just because I'm always home. So I can understand needing the help from time to time. That much I can at least, grasp in your situation. Well, we met in Milan. One moment, we were just two people walking in the green room having a heated debate over Wagner. Then we talked out together, and I accepted a kiss. I'm afraid I was smitten right there and then. And then Sherlock wanted to marry me, so we decided we must be married right away. You know how it is, Violetta. When you've met the love of your life, you want to start that life straight away. So we traveled to Lake Como, and were married by special license just over 3 weeks from our first encounter. It was such a beautiful, intimate ceremony, exactly what we wanted, wasn't it, darling? I glanced over at Holmes. Holmes nodded. Oh, yes, indeed, he said. That intimate wedding ceremony will always remain indelibly imprinted on my memory. Holmes laughed awkwardly, darting a glance at me. He sat with his legs crossed, shifting uncomfortably in his seat. This is like torture for him. It's hilarious. I smiled and said demurely, after the wedding, we traveled to Lake Garda. We stayed there for several days. Our little honeymoon. I smiled shyly. We then returned to Milan for the last performance at La Scala. After that, we decided we must come to Florence to meet you lovely people. The rest you already know. So far, it has all been rather wonderful. I bit my lip hard to stop myself from grinning. We are all so happy for you, Violetta beamed at us. Such an engaging, charming story. You know, I still have the first letter and photograph Ludo gave to me. She gazed across at her husband. Chiaro mio, she said. Vita mia, Ludo replied, staring back at her adoringly. I once again refilled my wineglass. Holmes flashed me a look of disdain, and I stared at him with brooding intensity. The Chianti was starting to take effect, my inhibitions disappearing faster than the wine I was consuming. I took a sip from my glass, licking my lips provocatively. Then finally I spoke softly, almost in a whisper, never once taking my eyes off Holmes, who was scolding me silently with his eyes. You know, they tell me it's quite a thing to save a photograph. And I believe it was Balzac who said, a letter is a soul so faithful, an echo of the speaking voice, but that to the sensitive it is amongst the richest treasures of love. I glanced over at Holmes with a mocking smile. He returned my gaze with silent curiosity. I looked around the table at Ava, Violetta, and Ludo, chatting and laughing together, their love for one another shining through. How I envied their unconditional, uncomplicated love for one another. I glanced over at Holmes again. He had lapsed into a sullen silence as the dinner dragged on. I could see from his tortured expression that he was most uncomfortable being forced to interact with a gaggle of women, finding the chitter-chatter no doubt tedious and irrelevant. Sensing his vulnerability, I took a deep breath. Please excuse me, ladies, Ludo. I have a terrible headache. I can feel one of my migraines coming on. I must go lie down. I am so dreadfully sorry. We were having such a wonderful time. Violetta frowned, a concerned look upon her face. Oh, can we get you anything, Nin? I know the migraines can be awful. Oh, no, thank you, Violetta. My prescription is back at the barn. Thank you so much for your hospitality. Sherlock, will you escort me back? Sherlock will escort me back. He'll look after me, won't you, darling? Holmes smiled, a look of begrudging gratitude upon his face as he nodded in agreement. Yes, of course. We bid farewell to the family and made our way to the barn in silence. As we entered the drawing room, I looked at Holmes with some trepidation. I don't know about you, Mr. Holmes, but I could sure do with a nightcap. He nodded curtly, walked over to the sideboard, and poured out a glass of wine and whiskey and soda. He handed me the wine, staring at me hard. I don't like surprises, Miss Adler. I'm not crazy about them myself, Mr. Holmes. Let me assure you this was hardly a whirl of fun for me. Believe me, Miss Adler, when I say the feeling is entirely mutual. I raised my glass. I think we need this little liquid stimulation after the Spanish Inquisition we just endured. I laughed nervously. At least it's over now. My narrative was, for the most part, the actual truth. I had to try and make our married life appear realistic. We are, after all, supposed to be newlyweds. Do you think they believed you? Quizzed Holmes. Yes, I said softly. I rather think they did. Although I must say you don't appear best pleased, Mr. Holmes. He fixed me with his piercing eyes. I've had better nights, I can assure you. I must, however, congratulate you on your impressive theaspin skills. You even surpassed my expectations. Why, thank you, Mr. Holmes. How kind of you to point that out, I muttered. That wasn't a compliment, Holmes scoffed. Speaking frankly, I found most of your narrative this evening to be quite discomforting, and I wasn't expecting you to consume quite so much Chianti. I glared at him, astounded by his astonishing chutzpah. I'm sorry, I didn't realize we'd returned to the world of Sherlock Holmes, where all kind words and considerations remain unacknowledged. If you want my advice, which I'm sure you don't, you appear far more adept at giving out so-called wise counsel rather than listening to it. Still, please allow me to give you some anyway. I'm on the edge of my seat, Miss Adler, giddy in anticipation. Pray, do enlighten me. I glared at Holmes. My advice to you, Mr. Holmes, is to live for the moment. Who knows what the future will hold? You really ought to engage with the world and discover new experiences. What's the worst that could happen? However, I would hardly expect you to lower yourself to the level of my licentious behavior, my debaucheries. Not all women are inscrutable. Our marriage of pretense was going along just fine until your inflated ego got in the way. I realize I'm a long way from your never-ending hill of Calvary because, in your eyes, you don't believe that Irene Adler is good enough to be the wife of the celebrated detective Sherlock Holmes, albeit a pretend one. You're the worst kind of pretentious snob, Mr. Holmes. You believe yourself in a class above the rest of us. All right, then. Holmes's face turned white with rage. He stared at me with a brooding fury. I'm afraid you are taking this far too personally. I turned to Holmes, narrowing my eyes. It is personal, God damn it! What was that? Gemma! Thank you for the 93 bits. You did way too much in the last stream. Please contain yourself. Also, we have ads starting in like a minute and a half.
Hey, honey, we're home.
We're home now.
Oh, man.
Honey, we're home. And we're almost finished with the chapter. That tea is delicious. Thank you for the bits, by the way. That was very kind of you. Okay. We're going to run the ad, and then we'll keep going. Because it's going to start way sooner than I can finish. An Unwell Beauty, you are doing a fantastic job on that puzzle, by the way. Keep it up. Gemma, how was your Sunday? How was your weekend? Get up to anything mischievous? Thank you for doing that shout out to Mama House Gaming. I know I can rely on you. This tea is delicious. Heck, I might even fire all the other mods because, gosh darn it, you're the best. Oh, how does Santa wear hats like this all the time? It's so bloody hot. Well, God mode is good enough for me. Or God mod, sorry. Same thing. God mod, God mode, whichever. 36 seconds and we'll be back to the book. Which I realized Gemma may not have heard me. So I shall ask the question again upon the end of the ads. "15 seconds. We can do this, people. Hold on to your hats." Oh, you're still there. Okay, cool. I was asking, how was your weekend? But I don't have a hat. Well, I'm sorry, you're gone. Also, hi. Ooh, you have lights next to your name. Clip the Halls. That's fun. What is that? For spreading the holiday cheer by sharing a clip to TikTok or YouTube during the Twitch holiday hoopla. Huh. Good for you. That's awesome. I was just asking how your weekend was going. How was your Sunday? Gemma. And since you're speaking now, Beauty, how's your weekend? It was good. We took a family trip to Fargo for shopping. How far did you go to get to Fargo? I'm just kidding. Don't answer that. That was a silly question. Just trying to be silly. Wow. Yeah, I know. It's the only thing I could come up with in that immediate moment. It's all right. We've been under the weather, but the kids seem absolutely fine right now. Ah, well, at least someone's okay. I'm sorry you're under the weather. That is never fun. Mama House Gaming, can we please give Unwell Beauty a shout out as well? It's like a 2 or 3 hour trip. Oh. Could be worse.
I'm just gonna hold a Carusi and run around.
Oh, look, Faz. Okay, the hat's coming off. I'm too hot. We'll just do that instead. Yeah, we did the holiday event Friday. Nice. Excellent. But then everyone got sick, so. It happens. I don't know why I'm still wearing pants, but that's crazy. All right, and of course I took my thumb off the page. Oh, wait. No, I didn't have to because we had just got to the top of page 127, because Irene Adler was like, "It is personal, god damn it." Okay. I will drink and then I will keep going. Cheers. All right, here we go. Holmes sat back in his chair, a weary, heavy expression on his face. This is a lovely reading from one of my favorite chapters. You brought the characters to life. Aw, thank you, Katie. You're so kind to me. You really are. He made no answer for some time. Then, at last, he spoke in a tone of utmost solemnity. Words. Enough. Enough of this nonsense. If I wanted your opinion, I would ask for it. But while I consider your narrative, you consider love makes fools of clever men. Perhaps you can stitch that sentiment onto a pillow. He spoke in an impersonal tone, his voice sharp and clear, freezing me with another cold stare. I may well do that, Mr. Holmes, I said, tears of anguish stinging my eyes. Why, you're no better than Godfrey. At least he had an excuse for bullying me. He was a hopeless addict, while you, sir, are a pompous arse and an addict. Your behavior this evening has been reminiscent of a petulant child. All you have done all day is moan and complain while leaving everything to me. Devil Dom, thank you for the follow. Welcome in. I've had my fair share of challenges in life, Mr. Holmes, but I'm still here, and I don't deserve to be treated this way. Sometimes you make it difficult for me to like you. Party hat, woo. His face softened for a moment. I'm sorry. I never intended to make you feel uncomfortable, Miss Adler. On the contrary, I wasn't trying to make you feel anything at all. Shall we call a halt to this now? He held up his hands. Before one of us says something else we may well regret. I flashed him a look of contempt. This response was like a red rag to a bull. Be careful, young lady, he said. As far as I'm concerned, this matter will bear no further discussions. I don't want to hear another word from you. Do I make myself clear? Duly noted. I rejoined, once again fighting back tears. I believe you have made yourself abundantly clear, Mr. Holmes. I've had all the incandescent conversation I can take for one evening. I bid you good night. I glared at him. Holmes stared back at me in exasperation, and so the conversation ended. He did not speak again. His parting shot, a bitter smile. I was once again stunned by his outrageous behavior, realizing it would be futile to argue or even attempt to discuss the matter further. I retired to my room, flushed and trembling. As I slammed the door behind me, I found it difficult to comprehend why he could have such an effect upon me. I sat on the bed and let out a gut-wrenching sob. Our altercation, my dressing down from Sherlock Holmes had deeply affected me. I immediately regretted my actions, conceding I had gone too far. Opening the bedroom door, I walked back into the drawing room and hesitated in the doorway only to hear the distinct sound of a door opening. Then the sound of the back door closing. a turning in the lock. I let out a deep sigh and reluctantly retired to my bedroom. Sitting on the bed, I stared at the ceiling. A single tear fell from my eye, caressing my cheek before rolling off my chin. I lay down on the bed and fell asleep. And that is the end of chapter 16. Yes, Devildom, welcome. Welcome. How are you? From whereth do you hail? Or, more normally said, where are you from? Are you a streamer? Are you an avid book reader? What's your deal? What's your thing? And of course, if you just wish to lurk in the shadows, that's totally fine. You don't have to answer any of my questions. Oh. All right, what time is it? Okay, we're good. KD, I am thoroughly enjoying the time and effort you have spent in perfecting these characters. You've really brought something new, in my opinion, to the voice of both of them. Not just Sherlock, but Irene as well. It's really quite refreshing. It really is. So, kudos to you. Well done. I think it's great. Gosh, why am I still... I swear to God, I'm going to take my pants off. I am so uncomfortable. Well, how should I do this? Go put on shorts, but they're a long way away. They're so far away. Thank you, Gemma. In the other room, and all I hear is, I'm going to take my pants off. So, Unwell. Normally I wear shorts when I stream because it's more comfortable. And the jeans I have on are like my nicer dress-up kind of jeans. And they're a bit tighter. So, yeah. So I was just thinking about taking them off, you see? I thought you guys had an ice storm going through the state. Well, yeah, we did, but it still became safe enough to drive. So we went out today. We didn't go out yesterday. No way. That's when the ice storm showed up. So, you know, don't do that. Stop mama's mama. Hey. Stop it. Thank you. It's really Irene Story Holmes happens to be living in it. Their character development is what most intrigues people. I mean, it's true. The story, of course, itself is one of interest, but there's always this preconceived notion of what Sherlock's gonna act like, sound like. Same with Irene in some regards, you know. But I feel like you've really kind of given them a new face. And yet, something that we can understand at the same time. They're not so new that we're like, is this Irene Adler? Is this Sherlock Holmes? Doesn't sound like it, because it really does. It does sound like them. But they sound just them. I don't know if I'm explaining it well. I'm just trying to say, I think you did a fantastic job. That's what I'm trying to say. It's really hard to take characters that are well known, so well known to the population, and then make them different in some way. Make them your own version That's really hard to do when everyone's already got a clear picture in their mind of who these people are. So the fact that you've been able to do that is fantastic. I mean, bravo. Yes, you are, and thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you. I'm glad you reached out when I posted and said, hey, I'm looking for books. On that note, let's carry on. Chapter 17, page 129 in the printed copy. This chapter is from Sherlock Holmes's perspective. After our altercation, I strolled outside to the garden to reflect on the events of the evening. Then, finally sitting down at the bench in the courtyard, I solaced myself with a cigarette. Thick blue cloud wreath spinning up as I collected my thoughts. I wasn't used to dealing with feisty, opinionated women. To me, women had always been mysterious, inscrutable creatures, to be tolerated only when it was impossible to avoid them. In all the years I'd spent on this planet, I rarely came across a woman I was even remotely interested in. Yet something about Irene Adler intrigued me in the way she stood up for herself. How her eyes had flashed with fire during our altercation. I have 3 more in the series. I thought I saw something like that. See, folks, you need to go check out her profile because this story isn't the only one. I was aware I'd upset her deeply. Watson was forever reminding me that my levels of bluntness and honesty often caused offense. Not that I took much notice of Watson's observations, or anyone else's for that matter. But this time was different. The more time I spent with her, the more difficult I found it to suppress my emotions. My hostility and bluntness were my way of addressing the situation and keeping that barrier between us, although I had not envisaged Irene Adler leaping over it. Eventually, I returned to the barn, closed the door, then bolted it with the crossbar before I returned to the drawing room. Or retired to the drawing room. Can't read now. Oh, that was it. All right. That was a very quick chapter. It took me by surprise. In fact, the next chapter is only a page, and the chapter after that is only just over 2 pages. So there you go. Chapter 18, Irene Adler. I jolted awake at 2 o'clock, my heart pounding. I was shaken from a bad dream and a troubled sleep. I slipped on my silk matching robe and slippers before entering the drawing room. I found Holmes fast asleep, his long frame curled up in the recess of a chaise lounge, his newspaper resting upon his knee. I stared at him for a moment, feeling an aching need to be back in his good graces. Going back into my bedroom, I returned with a pillow and blanket, gently removed the newspaper and took the empty glass from his hand before stubbing out the cigarette into the ashtray. I then tenderly covered him with the blanket, stroking his thick black hair from his forehead. My pulse quickened as my fingertips gently traced the lines around his mouth and eyes. Placing the pillow under his head, I took a deep breath in response to the startling wave of heat coursing through my body. Then, fighting tears very softly, I whispered, "Good night, Mr. Holmes." I heard movement behind me and turned around to find he had half opened his eyes. A faint smile appeared on his face. Observing the pillow and blanket, he closed his eyes. Entering my bedroom, I sat on my bed, pondering the events of the evening. I had retorted a little too much, it was true. but there appeared to be a pattern forming as I find myself once again retiring to my bed, angry with him, disappointed with myself. Alas, Mr. Holmes remained an insufferable prig. It's almost like they both know they're going to fall for each other and hate it. Oh, it's funny. Chapter 19. Irene Adler. I awoke anxious the following day after another restless night and toyed with my breakfast. I managed only a little dry toast and a cup of café noir. Finally, I decided to sit in the garden to take in some fresh air to help clear my head. I entered the parlor before luncheon to find Holmes seemingly ensconced in his newspaper. His brow darkened and he scowled, clearly in no mood for polite conversation. Star-crossed lovers? Indeed. Two celebs, each in their own right. Eventually, he looked up and nodded with a curt good afternoon. You are looking a little peaky, Neen. I hope you are not imbibing again. The drink is a good servant, but a poor master. Holmes spoke in a condescending tone as he turned over his newspaper, his lips tightly drawn. Gabriella served as luncheon in silence. Later that evening, Holmes joined me for dinner. I felt relieved when he invited me onto the patio to partake in our evening ritual of drinks. He sat opposite me, lit a cigarette, and continued to read his newspaper, not once looking up or offering anything in the way of conversation. Finally, I admitted defeat, conceding that we made a volatile combination. I wondered how we could fight, yet have so much in common. I took a sip from my glass before turning to face him. Mr. Holmes, do you not think we're a little old for the silent routine? Can we please call a truce and talk for a moment? This friction between us has to end, otherwise I fear I may get frostbite from your cold shoulder. I laughed nervously. If you will allow me, I would like to offer you an explanation. I was feeling stressed and then fortified with too much wine, which clouded my judgment. I took my mood out on you, which was unforgivable of me. I wish to make amends if you will only allow it. Miss Adler, I'm glad you reached this cleansing moment of clarity. An explanation is often more potent than apology in such matters. I realize that I should have been of greater assistance to you in our deception, and I was high-handed and I can talk. I think. Intransigent. I sincerely apologize. However, I suggest we put the matter behind us. I have one goal, and that is to get you home safely. We will make no further progress if we can concentrate only on our differences. Super! After Hours Broalition, Part 1. Right? Yeah. How are you, sir? It is great to see you.
Don't dead.
Oh my god, shoot him!
Oh.
You're good? I am glad to hear it. Did I spell that properly? Yeah, Pummel Party. That's right. I don't know why I didn't do a shout out though. Or a clip, I mean. Well, either way, go check out After Hours Broalition. Super is one of 3 brothers. He's obviously the the better of the three, but don't tell the other two I said that because I will deny it until my last breath. No, tell them. You drive a hard bargain, sir. If you PayPal me, I will consider it. Let's see. Yes. I appreciate that we had our differences, Mr. Holmes. Unfortunately, neither of us appears to be coping very well with confinement. Can we pretend that yesterday didn't happen? Consider it erased from my mind. Christmas is right around the corner. It sure is. God, it sure is. I am not ready. I hope you don't regret helping me. I'd hate for you to think that you're wasting your time. No, you are not wasting my time. I'm here because you need me to be. Not just as your protector, but also as your friend. I intend to bring this dreadful business to a swift and successful conclusion, so that we may return to normality. In the meantime, we are where we are. We should make the best of it. He smiled at me gently. I meant donos. Oh. Good thinking, Mama House Gaming. Good thinking. I nodded in agreement. Staring at Holmes with a bemused expression, I was grateful that his demeanor had changed, even if it was only from icy to tepid. Thank you, Mr. Holmes. I would like you to know I don't always have to agree with you to like and respect you. So please bear that in mind if, God forbid, we have any further altercations. I felt overwhelmed by our newfound rapprochement. I rose from my seat and entered the drawing room, placing a record on the gramophone. Our conversation continued with Richard Wagner's Der Ring der Nibelungen, there's a thing, playing in the background. Even though my self-confidence had sunk to an all-time low, I was struck by an overwhelming sense of certainty that he cared for me, albeit in his way. Yet I could not help feel the strain of his loneliness and the struggles that lay behind his genius. And that is the end of the chapter. Considering we started on chapter 14, it looks like we've read tons, because we're now on chapter 20. It's quite funny, actually. Delicious. And chapter 20 it is. After luncheon, oh wait, this is from Sherlock Holmes' perspective, by the way. Forgot to mention that. After luncheon, I took Miss Adler out for a ride in the brougham to take in some fresh air the following day. The afternoon was perfect as we drove through the Tuscan hills. I pointed out various landmarks and places of interest along the way, such as the Mur Etrusque and the Convento di San Francesco, and the caves, finally stopping for a while at an archaeological area, home to the historical ruin of a Roman amphitheater, which offered breathtaking scenic views of the countryside. Miss Adler appeared fascinated by the massive stones that made up the Etruscan walls, the remains of Roman baths. The amphitheater had the hallmarks of a classical stage set in a semicircle around which people would have sat and watched the performances. Encompassed by green hills, the theater looked spectacular in the glow of the afternoon sun. I pointed out the green hilltop where Leonardo da Vinci first experimented with flight. "This is so beautiful," she sighed. I smiled at her. It is indeed a place of natural beauty. Could you possibly imagine performing here all those years ago? I am told you are a fine actress amongst your other remarkable talents. Tell me, do you prefer music to the stage? Oh, music by far, Mr. Holmes. For me, acting tends to start with what's already written on the page. The actor has little control over the narrative, but music can and should, in my opinion, begin anywhere. I nodded. Indeed, I have so far only seen a glimpse of your remarkable talent, but that is something I intend to put right once all this madness is behind us. I shall look forward to seeing you perform again in concert. Thank you. I shall look forward to it, she said. We spent the remainder of the afternoon sitting in quiet contemplation, taking in the magnificent scenery. After our afternoon excursion to the ruins, we stopped off at Ricardo's in the village for a glass of wine. We sat in the beer garden, observing a wedding party spilling out from the marquee. They look happy, I said, acknowledging the blushing bride and groom. Yes, until one of them messes it up. I left her briefly to call into the telegraph office. A telegram had arrived from Mycroft, which went thus. My dear brother, I implore you to be extra vigilant. I'm afraid you may no longer only have Palmer to deal with. I have just discovered the shocking news that Colonel Moriarty escaped his asylum. I'm not sure how or why as yet, but you can rest assured I'll be making rigorous inquiries with the help of Lestrade and the Metropolitan Police. It is unlikely Moriarty will know you are in Florence, but I think it best not to take any chances. I will report back to you shortly. In the meantime, take good care. Yours, Mycroft. I quickly returned to the beer garden, relieved to find Miss Adler sitting waiting for me. I decided not to tell her about Moriarty, at least not yet. I beckoned the waiter to bring over the bill. He deftly arrived to inform me that the gentleman at the bar had already taken care of it. He handed Irene Adler a single red rose. The gentleman in the bar asked me to give you this. He said he was quite a fan. What gentleman? Can you show me where he is? I asked. He left about 10 minutes ago, said the waiter. Can you describe him? I quizzed. Yes, he's not a regular. He was English, I think, tall and slim. He was wearing a cap pulled down over his face and thick horn-rimmed glasses. I ran outside and looked all around the surrounding area. There was no sign of anyone fitting the man's description. Is something wrong, Mr. Holmes? Asked Miss Adler when I eventually returned to the bar. She stared at me anxiously. I'm not sure. I suppose he could have been a fan. If so, why did he not present the flower to you himself? Perhaps he was shy. That happens sometimes, she replied. I smiled at her reassuringly. I had no wish to alarm her unnecessarily. Of course, I think we should head back to Le Sceau. And that's the end of the chapter. Oh boy. Do we think it was a fan? Or was it something else? Could have been a simple thing, but then Holmes receiving that telegram and then suddenly this rose shows up? The bill paid for? I don't know. The timing. The timing seems all too suspicious. But I guess we'll find out. Beware Greeks bearing gifts. Oh boy. But he wasn't Greek. Didn't you say he was... Yeah, you said he was English. So... who knows? Chapter 21. Irene Adler. After dinner each evening, Holmes and I would retire to the veranda. Would retire to the veranda. That's just a regular saying in the UK. So what you're saying is he could have been anybody. Right. Well, that makes things more interesting, doesn't it? The nights would slip smoothly along as Holmes enjoyed a glass of whiskey or port and a pipe of tobacco, with me partaking of an occasional glass of dry sherry or Chianti. Fortified by the whiskey and port, his mood brightened. We engaged in deep, meaningful conversations on a variety of subjects. I considered him an extraordinary individual, brilliant, intelligent, and eccentric. I came to recognize his little peculiarities. Although I hadn't liked him much on first impression, finding him arrogant and self-absorbed, my opinion changed as I came to know him. I was instinctively aware when Holmes needed his own space and quiet time for contemplation, discreetly retiring to my bedroom when I sensed his need for solitude. There was no doubt that most women would find his behavior odd, strange even, but I reveled in his company. Key. What, did I say something wrong? Oh, are you talking about the wine? Is it Chianti? Chianti. Why is it spelled with a ch sound? Chianti. So it's Chianti. I mean, you would know. You're the wine connoisseur. You know, the English language is absolutely dreadful. It is so dumb. We spell things in the way that they are not pronounced, and we pronounce things in the way they are not spelled. Anyway, carrying on. Holmes only had my best interests at heart. He put himself at risk trying to protect me. I knew of no one else who would be prepared to do that. Consequently, I felt strangely drawn to him, like a moth to a flame. That's a very good analogy considering the situation they're in. I was under no illusions that our adventure would continue. I was aware that we would go our separate ways as soon as the case was solved and the perpetrator found. It was unlikely that I would ever see him again. I felt profound sadness at the thought. To Holmes, I was a mere factor in a problem, just a number from his extensive casebook. So many of those had made their way into Dr. Watson's chronicles. I wondered if I would ever become part of that collection. No doubt Holmes would lose interest in me once the case was closed. Part of me hoped that Palmer was not apprehended too quickly. I had even considered suggesting that we remain friends and write to each other occasionally. I would have liked that. I had not yet plucked up the courage to make the suggestion, as I was afraid he would reject the idea out of hand. A few of the local boys came over to LaSalle to help me out around the farm in the evenings. We would observe them from a distance, whetting their scythes and harvesting the fields against the backdrop of the beautiful Tuscan sunset. The smell of newly cut grain in the moonlight was intoxicating. Javier Arnca would often join them. He was 6 feet tall, remarkably handsome, with jet black curly hair and deep-set brown eyes. He would glance over to us from time to time, smiling and waving, much to Holmes' disdain. I laughed in amusement. I was immune to his charms. Indeed, I was far more interested in the swifts. I would sit for hours marveling at the birds, preening and screeching out to each other as they built their nest out of grass, leaves, and feathers. Holmes observed me watch them with mild amusement. Left to my own devices, often for long periods, I amused myself by reading or sketching. Finally, after much persuasion, explaining that I felt like a wasp in a jar, Holmes reluctantly agreed that I could go outside to take some exercise on the proviso that I stayed within the confines of the farm and went in disguise. I agreed to his terms, so the following day I ventured out on my walk, determined to make the most of the tiny crumbs of freedom bestowed on me by Sherlock Holmes. The blissful rays of the Tuscan sunshine touched my face with the promise of a new day. The smell of nature amidst the spring blooms was an exhilarating experience. As I approached the stables, I was disturbed by the sound of the swifts brawling in the eaves, and then by the sight of a slim, athletic-looking youth walking out of the stable block, leading a powerful-looking bay colt. I was surprised to see it was Javier. I stared at the horse, a beautiful Anglo-Arab Sardinian, with 4 white socks and a star on its forehead. His coat gleamed, shining like a barn door in the Tuscan sunshine. I watched as Javier led the colt over to the mounting block, tentatively easing himself into the saddle. He was about to place his boots into the stirrups when the colt became fractious and reared up, flinging his jockey unceremoniously out of the saddle. Javier landed on the ground with a thud, nibbling the Tuscan turf. Now rid of his jockey, the colt casually walked away to graze nearby. I ran over to Javier. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "No, just my pride," said Javier. He stared at the colt, shaking his head. "He has only recently been broken in. Clearly he has a mind of his own." I slowly walked over to the colt. His head jarred up at my approach, and he flicked back his ears, swishing his tail. "Hey," I said in a slow, soothing voice. "Steady, my beauty." I chuckled softly, taking hold of the bridle and blowing gently into the colt's nostrils, which seemed to calm him down. I slowly moved my hands over the colt's head, neck, and withers, gently slipping my fingers under the girth which was holding the saddle in place. Unfortunately, the band was far too tight. As I realized from my time at my uncle's ranch in the Catskills, I learnt that a twisted girth could often lead to an anxiety in a horse. I readjusted the saddle, unfastened the girth, and loosened it a couple of notches. I waved over Pietro, the stable boy, a keen-faced youth with protruding ears. He held the colt's head and gave me a leg up until I was safely in the saddle. I purposely kept my feet out of the stirrups. Pietro stared at me in disbelief, snickering to himself. "I'd keep one finger on the neck strap if I were you. He's got quite a reputation." "Walk on," I said. After a while, I placed my boots into the stirrups. The colt broke into a trot. We continued trotting until we reached the far end of the meadow. I leaned forward in the saddle, squeezing my thighs. The colt immediately picked up the snaffle bit and broke into a canter. We continued steadily around the field's perimeter, passing the farmhands and Ludo in the adjoining meadow. He was leaning on his pitchfork and shouted out to me, "Quello, c'è una donna." What a woman! Finally, we approached the stables where Javier stood waiting for us open-mouthed. Upon seeing the stables, the colt's Herding instinct kicked in and he slowed down to a trot. I crouched down low in the saddle, whispering words of encouragement. "Come on, boy. Show me what you've got." I kicked the colt's belly. We quickly extended to a gallop. I felt as though I was floating on air as the colt's long, powerful stride ate up the ground. He was by far the quickest horse I'd ever ridden, in a different league to the sturdy quarter horses of the Catskills. We completed an entire circuit of the meadow, eventually coming to a halt next to the stables, where Javier and Pietro stood waiting for us. Javier wore a look of considerable astonishment. I laughed. I dismounted the colt and spoke to Javier until Pietro opened the loose box and led the colt back into the stable, where he unsaddled him, replacing the bridle with a head collar. The colt was sweating profusely, steam coming from his body as a result of our exertions. Pietro pulled a sponge from a nearby bucket and began to wash down the colt. Javier and I stood to one side, watching them. "What is his name?" I quizzed. "Allegro," Javier replied. "He is Violetto's pride and joy. What you say, the apple of her eye? His dam died when he was a foal, and Violetta hand-reared him until Ludo managed to borrow a foster mother from one of the neighboring farms. Allegro is very special to her." I patted the colt and spoke to him softly, stroking his head under his forelock. "Well, Allegro, you certainly live up to your name. There was an old saying back at the Catskills. One white sock, buy him. 2 white socks, try him. 3 white socks, beyond the sly. 4 white socks, pass him by. But I never put much store into that old wives' tale. All the best horses have quirks." I laughed. "He's a lovely horse, Javier. He has such a beautiful way about him. Tell me, did you break him in?" "Yes," Javier said with an air of pride and conviction. A flush of color appeared on his cheeks. "Well, you should be very proud of yourself. You've done an excellent job. He skips along the ground like a ballet dancer." We continued chatting about horses, music, and family. I found our conversation surprisingly heartfelt, and Javier to be an agreeable, sensitive young man. I suspected that he had a sneaking regard for Ava, the way he looked at her with such profound tenderness. Realizing I would be late for luncheon, I made my excuses and returned to the barn. You know, it's been a long time since I've ridden a horse. I certainly didn't take it galloping. But we definitely trotted along, and I gotta tell you, it's such a wonderful feeling to ride a horse. I can't really describe why. But it's just different in all the right ways. It's like you're connecting with nature in a way that was, I don't want to say meant to be, but feels perfectly natural. It's pretty awesome. I wish I could do it again. Maybe I will. You never know. All right, we're going to read one more chapter because it's a paragraph. And then we're going to find somebody to raid out to. It is a very short one. But I gotta say, I have thoroughly enjoyed the calm read tonight. It's been such a lovely evening. The story's been wonderful. And the chapters have just really even though the protection of Irene Adler, like the job hasn't really gone too far, it still feels like we've learned so much in the chapters that we've read. It's nice. And I feel like something's right around the corner because, well, otherwise that telegram wouldn't have been there, and that rose, that interesting rose, which could be nothing, could be pure coincidence, but who knows? Looking forward to seeing where this goes. It's been quite remarkable, thank you. No, thank you. The thanks are mine, sincerely. And I want to thank the rest of you as well for being here, for hanging out with me, for listening, whether you're active in chat or just hanging out in the background or working on a puzzle. I appreciate you. Chapter 22, Sherlock Holmes. I was on my way back from the village, approaching the Saul, when my eyes took in the haunting image of Irene Adler astride a colt, cantering through the fields. I stopped the brougham and watched as they gathered momentum and galloped past. The colt's hooves rattled over the turf, snorting and straining every sinew. Adler's cap had flown off. Her long auburn hair glistened in the sun like burnished copper, hanging loose upon her shoulders. I watched as she rode back to the stables and dismounted the colt. I continued to observe as she spoke to the Anka boy, the two of them laughing and joking together for several minutes before they entered the stables together. I sat, contemplating for several minutes before I finally picked up the reins and proceeded on my way back to Les Saules, the sound of their laughter ringing in my ears. And that's literally the end of that chapter. So Sherlock Holmes sees them, hears her laughing, them having a good time, enjoying conversation. There's nothing in this chapter that gives away his emotions. There's nothing in the chapter that tells us how he perceives this moment. Does it have an impact on him? Is it literally just an observation and he stored it away in his little mind palace? But I think we're all thinking the same thing. Secretly, we are hoping that it has made some sort of impact on him. Because, let's be honest, the sound of laughter can really change our brain waves, our mind, in the way it kind of receives data and starts to process it. Laughter is so powerful. Smiles and laughter, one visual, one audible, they can be really, what's the word I'm trying to think of? They're really strong. That's not the word I'm trying to think of. But anyway. No, we appreciate you. No, I appreciate you. I think it's quite a profound moment. Yes, I was picking up on that. Good night, Kay. Go sleep in your actual bed now. That would be a great idea. All right. Let me pull up. Oh, hey, I'm looking at myself. Was impactful the word you were looking for? Maybe. I just feel like laughter has this way of changing how we perceive things, how we think about things. It literally changes the makeup of our brain and how we process information coming in. It can really change you. I have a strong belief in that. Anyway, getting off task. Okay. Okay. Yep. Yep. I think got some friends of mine that we haven't raided in a while. We're gonna go say hello to Here There Be Monsters. Please copy the raid message if you don't mind. I had a blast reading to you this evening. I will be back Thursday the 19th. I will be there. I will be here. I mean, technically, wherever you are, I'll be there on your screen too. So that kind of works. But either way, I hope you have a fantastic week ahead of you. Please take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and have a wonderful night. Good night.